So no ground fix. Cool. All right, what's this bar that's filling up? It's at 96%. I think we're f***ed. Once it hits 100. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Ultimate attack. Oh, you're f***ed. Hey, it's Soul, and welcome back to Warcraft Weekly, where I can lord my awesome transmog over the rabble. Don't forget to send some support to the channel by liking the video, subscribing for more, and let's get started. Patch 9.2 continues its weeks-long rollout with the start of Season 3. With the raids and the PvPs and the mythic pluses and the bugs, oh, sweet, glorious bugs. There are many, and there have been fixes, as well as tuning and adjustments and more, but I want to highlight one issue, just one, because it's one of the biggest bugs that I've ever seen go unfixed. I'm talking about Popopoc, or Poco for short. As you know, Poco is a companion that tags along with us on adventures. It's also a ball of hatred and destruction if it gets into combat. Before I continue, I should point out that this bug might be fixed before this weekly goes live. You'll know as I point right here. Maybe it's fixed, maybe not, but I invite you to join me for some bug exploration and probably a bit of preaching. You see, Poco, as the centerpiece of the Cipher of the First Ones, the main zone feature of patch 9.2, is supposed to fight alongside you. That's the narrative that I'm writing, at least. Many of you, notably ranged DPS or healers, might not know that it can naturally enter combat. We've had bodyguard NPCs in the past. Normally, you see a mob, you hit it with an ability, and if you have a pet like Poco, it'll assist you and enter combat against mobs on your aggro table. But as you can see, it's not. It doesn't know it's in combat, even if my character is. In this state, if I dismiss Poco and then resummon it, it'll enter combat as intended. Yay. This is super annoying though. It means you have to redo Poco's costume if you have one set, and you won't be able to change it to its melee or healer spec if you have that unlocked, because you can't talk to it while it is in combat. I hope you're following along. Here's how to make Poco enter combat properly. You need to body pull. That is, you gotta get close enough to the enemy to enter their aggro radius and enter combat. Once you are in combat, you can then use abilities and Poco will assist you until you leave combat, and will even engage other enemies that join up. If you run into an enemy's AoE attack to enter combat, that works too. Small twist though, if you're mounted up and you enter combat, if you use an ability to dismount, the bug will happen and Poco will not fight. You'll have to make sure you're in aggro, manually dismount, then you can attack. What's especially annoying with this is that some mobs in the zone, notably a few rares, are neutral. You have to attack it to engage combat, meaning the bug is impossible to completely avoid. If you want to engage a mob pack or a rare already fighting someone else, and if it doesn't happen to do any AoE, once again, you're forced to make Poco bug out. Why is this a big deal? You might be wondering. It's a big deal because 1, I decided it is. That's kind of what content creators do, kick up dust. And 2, because it actually is a big deal. It's easy to reproduce, and while I don't know how any of this works under the hood, the QA spirit in me still burns, and that includes bringing up stuff that I think is important and not shutting up. Imagine your character having to initiate combat with a body pull, or having to walk into a cleave or crap on the ground in order to enter combat, otherwise you can't enter combat. It sounds pretty dumb, right? More importantly though, Poco is part of the big 9.2 zone feature, and not having the feature function properly is not good. It should be a known issue. I at least have been reporting it since the PTR, and up until now, it's still not working. As for how it affects me personally, it's actually pretty significant. I want to be on my hunter and have that feeling of having like beasts and robots going ham on the enemy, but I don't want that experience to be muddied up by having to do gamer workarounds just to capture that feeling of fun, so I'll wait. And that's unfortunate because now my player behavior is being dictated by a bug that's been around for what I think has been like months. That's where we're at with this. I really hope that it did get fixed between now and the actual publishing of this video, so you can all point this out in the comments. But in case it hasn't, I'd like all of you to do me a favor. Try this bug out on your own. See for yourself. Find out what happens when you walk into combat and then use abilities versus entering combat from range. What does your Poco do? And if you see the bug, report it. Go to the main menu, support, and submit feedback or bug report. I'll even leave you a prepared report to copy and paste into it. There's always social media and forums as well, which I've been reporting to, but every little bit helps. If you think this bug is urgent and needs a fix, help Poco out. This week, players re-enter familiar territory with the PvP and Mythic Plus season. The early reaction to the new solo shuffle brawl, or a mix of, hey, this is great, we get to solo queue for raiding.
And hey, whoa, it's just a brawl that doesn't give raiding like they promised.
They didn't promise.
OMG, I'm so mad.
I invite you to share your thoughts on this as well. Should the solo shuffle give raiding right now? As usual, I'm on either side of this. Like, on the one hand, sure, why not give the raiding? What's the worst that could happen? There's a legit argument that some can make that by not giving the solo shuffle a grand entrance with raiding, folks won't be interested, giving Blizzard an excuse to be like, oh well, I guess people aren't interested, back to the status quo. I know that's a bit cynical and it hasn't even been a week yet, but we're hearing that already. I'm also a skeptic of the solo shuffle itself. Like, okay, it seems promising and well thought out, and by its nature, it's positioned to be the #1 way to do rated PvP the day it launches with raiding. I won't be surprised if it kills rated Battlegrounds as we know it within like half a season. If the WoW team knows that the solo shuffle is going to be huge, I guess it's not too surprising that they want to make sure that the experience itself works while they iron out the actual raiding and MMR systems or whatever for the next expansion. Maybe a series of 3s matches is okay. Maybe it should be 2s instead, or maybe it should be 5s. Since we're at the last season of an expansion, now is a safe time to try this whole thing out. Because once raiding is added to solo shuffle, that's a door that probably can't be closed. It's also hard to gauge how new people are receiving the new encrypted effects over in Mythic Plus world, especially because I haven't done any yet. With this week's affixes, Tyrannical, Bolstering, and Explosive, it's only half of the experience, but some reports are coming in that the affix is, well, kind of boring. Like I said, I haven't done any keys yet, but so far that sounds like good news because I found Tormented to be boring too, just in a good way. Tormented was just get the best buffs for the instance. Very simple. For the encrypted effects, feels like you just pull the mobs in the right order for a benefit. It keeps me engaged without too much guesswork. But having to do like almost mathematically perfect runs under the Season 1 Prideful effects, that was a bit too much. Encrypted is like Prideful Light, with more than a few packs to get another round of buffs should they be lost. And then we have to talk a bit about what is new, the Sepulcher of the First One's raid. No spoilers, but players got to take on the first 8 bosses of the raid on normal and heroic difficulty. The general consensus is that this raid is pretty darn hard, maybe overtuned. It's reflected in the many hotfixes that the WoW team has put in just this week. To be fair, it is great to see that the team is showing that it can be pretty responsive, pretty fast. You could say that with the way that the raid and the patch features roll out, it's kind of like a soft achievement is being set up for top players to complete the raid before the 5th week of the patch. We're on the 3rd right now, by which time tier sets can be completed and all players can have access to double legendaries. The reactions to said difficulty have been mixed, and I'll point out a few specific reactions for the sake of discussion and to put a little color on the thumbnail. Thanks. Editors for Asmongold's clip channel are painting a picture of how the raid is, quote, so bad that it made one of the game's most prolific streamers just up and quit. Now this is the thing that Asmongold just does. It's a new season, he jumps into the new raid with viewers, buries the bosses under DPS and corpses until finished. But from what I saw, yeah, he had a pretty bad time in the normal difficulty of the raid.
Streamer tries to blind Pug from the distressed faction, and here's what happened.
Not nearly as clickbait, but that's pretty much what happened. Asmongold himself had a follow-up video where he was more calmed down and broke down the reasons why his raid was a spectacular failure, like unpreparedness and lack of coordination. Likely the biggest reason is the fact that many of the heavy hitters for these sorts of runs switched from Alliance to Horde, and well, then the video conversation kind of degraded into just ripping into WoW. He also described his experience in the raid, and by that I think he meant the difficulties and the frustrations as being similar to the average raider's experience. I admit that's not super far off the mark. Like, my own team spent a total of 7 hours to take down only 3 bosses in normal difficulty as well. But I feel like his conclusions come from a place that doesn't connect with so-called average players, and it risks being a little bit misleading. I'll talk more on that later. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Max, the guildmaster and shotcaller of Liquid. They're one of the top WoW rating guilds, which defeated the 8th boss of the raid heroic first in the world, as if that matters. But in contrast, his team is highly organized, paid to win, almost literally literally, and so has a very different approach to raiding compared to what Asmongold does on his streams. Max gave an early reaction to the title and thumbnail saying, quote, "Not having fun raiding is whatever and a personal thing, but thinking that raid is so bad, I'd love to hear the case for that. I think the first 8 are really well made." That's cool coming from the leader of a team who probably couldn't care less for anything except mythic raids. And I don't mean that as an insult to either of these players at all. This is just illustrating the contrast between two players' views on this raid and raiding in general. Folks like Asmongold, the way I see it, come from the position of wanting to entertain. He said it himself, and I'm paraphrasing here, that spending all night wiping on a few bosses is not fun, nor is it all that entertaining. I agree that it's not entertaining for an audience of observers. There are reasons why I don't stream my raids. Like, most of you would cringe. It's like looking at my bags for 3 hours non-stop. By contrast, watching the best raiders wiping for hours on end is arguably more entertaining because they're pushing the hardest content with the best gear that they can get their hands on for the glory of being first. The difference is that one wants to entertain with moments of fun and excitement. The other wants to entertain with the emotional catharsis of competition. The commonality? Getting paid, baby. And some of you might rip my head off for this. Maybe I'm poking at the bear or something, but I feel like Asmongold has simply moved on from what World of Warcraft raids have to offer because being an entertaining streamer is more important to him. Showing people that he's having fun is more important to him. Now, of course, he wants to have genuine fun too. There's nothing wrong with preferring a positive feedback loop. There's nothing wrong with agreeing with that sentiment either. What I find distressing though, and again, this is just my opinion, is that his message sets a tone that the raiding experience can and should just be thrown together and completed like it's Raid Finder difficulty. I bet that if Asmongold ran with his guild Indestructible, a team that he knows, who knows him, and even reached out pointing out their early wins, he probably would have had a better time. If cross-faction was a thing now in patch 9.2, he could have found a way out of those less ideal raid conditions and probably would have had a better time. This was a boring story that people are monetizing off of. By the way, like and subscribe, and you know how much I love reading Patreon names. My team only defeated 3 bosses, and even early on, I kind of figured, oh, there's way too much trash in this raid. I think everyone can agree with at least that, but so far, I personally have enjoyed the raid encounters a lot. A lot when it's only 3 out of 11 doesn't mean a lot, genius. A little bit about me and my raid team. We raid semi-blind. That means not watching the guides, not looking at the dungeon journal really, at least not until after a few pulls. A few folks on my team do look ahead. Maybe they pug outside of guild runs, but they know to keep their mouths shut and not help. I have boss mods on, but without any context, it's not like I know what these timers and bars mean. I try to set the tone that we're not competing against anyone but our own competence. We learn from repetition, from remembering, from practice. Almost every pull is better than the last because maybe we noticed the thing that indicates where the wave comes from, or we figured out the ad placement when they spawn. We found out that the safe zone is chosen randomly. Whoops. Move out and then move into the middle, or move out twice. I use the 4 OG boss mods of remembering things, getting good, and counting. What I try to do for my team is create this sort of shared experience where we're all trying to learn and progress while blowing tons of my gold on repairs and consumables, but for me, as raid lead specifically, learning the fights and figuring out the strategies on my own is an experience that you only get to have once. I don't want that to be taken away from me because someone's telling me what to do or I'm reading a guide, because then I'm just following an instruction manual on how to maybe get loot. I think for some that's what the game is to them, getting loot, and overcoming content just gets in the way. Now, I also got to pull back though and say that there's no problem with people who want to play with guides and add-ons and all the weak auras. It's been a long time since vanilla with months-long progression through a raid and keeping encounter strategies close to the chest. Zymox is a pretty fun dance with lots of layers and needs lots of improvisation that needs to be learned and practiced. Meanwhile, the gamers, the audience types have gotten broader, with some being more mainstream than others. That's what social games like WoW are, made up of different people with different styles of play. The social game of it is to get all of these like-minded people playing together, because trying to mix those groups together, whether it's in a raid or in a discussion, it often turns into a fight of how the game is supposed to be played sort of conversation, and I was really walking the line just now. The question that I have for you folks who raid now, or who used to or want to raid is, where do you stand on the spectrum? Do you prefer to go blind or have as much knowledge as possible? Do you prefer static teams like guilds or pugs? Do you lead or do you follow? How reliant are you on add-ons? And most importantly, oh man, I'm asking a lot of questions, but most importantly, for all of your preferences, are you having good experiences? Why or why not? I hope to hear from a lot of you, not exactly for the purpose of discussion, but I just want to listen. And I do this every now and then. I think now is a good time though to sit down and talk about how my guild has been able to survive the past 14 or so years, but notably during Shadowlands, when many but not all players have been met with frustrations and disappointment. I do hope you'll join me for that. For now though, that is the show, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the week. I've been slamming the zone, collecting more transmog, and I just need one more weapon to complete my Skittle sword collection. But I also want to start knocking out some keys for a little extra punch in raid progression, of course. We were straight up hitting the enrage timer for Zymox with only a few early deaths, which tells me a little more throughput would go a long way. I guess one last thing to ask some of you who made it to the end here, would you want to see some of my raid streams? If they happen, it's going to be on Tuesdays and Thursdays, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific. I haven't done it in a while because I don't really allow backseating. Heck, I'm not even going to be reading chat for 90% of the time. I'll be engaged with my guild, so I feel like trying to stream it, I'm not really contributing anything, but if people are up for watching, I'll flip on the stream and just let it run. Let's give thanks to the folks over on Twitch in the meantime. Sorry again for missing a day earlier this week and for putting up with listening to like all my real life stuff. Normally Coffee with Soul goes on Tuesdays through Thursdays starting at 8:30 a.m. Pacific. Another thanks to the Patreon family for the support, and to you, viewer, for making it to the end, and for liking the video, and for subscribing too. I hope to see you next week for the start of the Race to World First for what might be a week of big news for Blizzard games, maybe a review of the best and worst of league season, and so much more. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.
Getting needed.
We just did it.
Going up.
You guys got it.
Baby.
Nice.
Woohoo!
Nice.
And I
Nice.
got fourth. Let's go.
End of tier. All right.
Hey.
Well, that was a good expansion, guys. I'll see you on the Dragon Isles.
Hey.
Hey.